maybe we don't have to translate, but.
All right, well, thank you for coming. I'm Dan Ligon. I'm an associate teaching professor in CMCI, also an Atlas Fellow. And so Atlas was probably the first place where this research really started getting developed. So I'm glad to be back to show you where we've come. This is something we talk about quite a bit. How many ideas do you need to get to a big idea? And I'll go through it. One of my colleagues said I had too many slides, but I disagree. We originally presented these results back in 2023 at the International Conference on Design Principles and Practices. And this is when it was really just the structural differences between an idea and a concept. Concept I'm going to use back and forth as a synonym for big idea. So, but what today's presentation is that this is a preview of a workshop. So we're going back to the conference in 2025. These results were good and the data was good, but we realized we kind of want to create a more pure data set. So we're going back to conduct a workshop to actually start collecting data. But I want to take all the fellows and everyone through where we're at. I do like the Atlas Fellows. It's sort of like the Explorers Society back in 19th century England, right? People would go out and they'd come back and report on the newt they found someplace. So I live in the world of design. I teach creative, especially in strategic communication. So if you're a designer, this is pretty common knowledge. We all understand that there's ideas and there's big ideas, right? Basically that means some ideas are better than others. People may disagree with this, but when we ideate to solve what we call a hairy challenge, we're not looking for the ordinary ideas, those first ones. We're looking for the exceptional ones, the big ideas. And where I live, we always call these big ideas the concepts. Because what we don't want to get into is sort of a litigation of, well, you think that's your idea and that's my idea, and it's a subjective battle. We really started to look at big ideas as something almost empirical that can stand alone. Going backwards. So when we were processing ideas, we would go through dozens, scores, hundreds, sometimes thousands. We'd pitch them to creative directors, and the majority were dismissed because they were just said, these aren't concepts, these aren't big ideas. And when I was starting out, this was extremely confusing to me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was like, why doesn't this idea work? So one of the things that we used quite a bit, and this was a toehold that a lot of us have in the industry, is that an idea is an insight plus an execution, and that equals a concept. So a concept is an idea, an insight, and an execution, how it comes to life. That's a concept. We could actually simplify that to say, well, maybe a concept is just an idea with an insight, which brings up the question, what is an insight? Fortunately, there's a whole pool of study in psychology, but basically you can boil it down. An insight is sort of that eureka moment, that aha, like, wow, I got it, I figured it out. And there's actually definitions. So in the naturalistic study of insights, insight involves a person making a radical shift in their mental model. And there's insight challenges, especially out of the D school, where they give you these little tricks. And can you think outside the box is usually what we talk about it. But if we define it for this idea of a big idea, a concept, we can sort of say, well, that's a big idea is an idea with a novel or radical element, something that's unexpected or something that's new. And that tracks with my business, where whenever we were dealing with communication artifacts, it was like, show me something I haven't seen before. That's been the common mantra. So I was excited, like, hey, we've got a working idea, a working definition of a big idea. It's an idea with a radical or novel. So this brings up the question, how many ideas does one need generally? How many ideas do you have to actually sit there and come up with to stand a reasonable chance that one of those ideas is big? It's novel, that it's different. When I was first showing this to the Atlas Fellows, I would say my estimation was about 1 in 50, 2 in 50. I think that's some of the early work, which is why this graphic 50 light bulbs and 2 are big. Soon realized that that number was way up. And what happened was between the last time we spoke and the last time I was here, is that this notion of an idea ratio got defined. And this actually got defined by Stanford back in 2022, where they published that in their experience, The idea is somewhere on the order of 2,000 to 1. And they called it the idea ratio, right? And they were looking, and they were really looking in sort of terms of product development. And they were sort of looking at it in terms of the entire life cycle. All right, we've got a big idea, we've got a big solution. How many ideas did we go through to arrive at this scene? But your reaction was the reaction everyone has. It's like, I really have to come up with 2,000 ideas to come up with a big one. Well, what happened is that we realized here at the University of Colorado that we actually had a data set where we could actually further define the idea ratio. Over many semesters, I teach concepting, coming up with big ideas to our StratCom undergraduates. And one of the challenges I gave them every semester was come up with an idea to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. Right? So if you had a brick and you have to sell it, but it can't be used as a brick, what idea would that be? And this is where I'd invite you all to play along if you guys want to start thinking about ideas to come up with a brick. You can see where we're going to land with the whole thing. Well, what happened was this challenge is netted us a data set of about exactly 7,216 ideas to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. So we had a huge data set, more than I've ever encountered. And here's another insight I found, and this is early AI, you can tell. I said, show me a researcher confounded by his inability to understand a brick. But insight requires overcoming functional fixedness. And what is functional fixedness? Well, functional fixedness is, can you see something for use other than what it is? Can I, if I only see its function and I'm fixated on that, I probably can't make those radical leaps, those big jumps that requires to do a big idea. And so that's why you can't sell a brick as a brick. You know the function of it, it's a brick, but we have to imagine a new function for it that isn't a brick. And so by forcing the students, or challenging the students to overcome the functional fixedness of only seeing a brick as a brick, those who are brainstorming to come up with ideas to solve this challenge are basically primed to come up with insights. They're sort of almost boxed into sort of not going for ordinary solutions. And therefore, if they could come up with ideas with insights, the chances are those ideas were big and those would be the concepts. All right, so we had all the parameters to sort of really put that idea ratio to the test. So I'll give you guys the end of it since people have to check out. What was our idea ratio? Well, we got it down to 376 to 1. It's still a big number, but it's not 2,000, not 2,000 to 1. And this is why we're going back to the conference in next spring in order to sort of challenge this number to see if that really is the number or if we had other factors that were limiting this. But I'll take you through how we got to here. So how we got to 376. Well, if you've ever processed ideas, which I think everyone in our business does, we look at ideas and new ideas all the time. Looking at 7,216 ideas for concept potential, like, oh, well, could this work? What about this one? It felt like looking for a needle in a haystack by examining every piece of straw. We just didn't have time for that. It was, rather than trying to fix all the ideas, we decided we had actually a big idea. Oh, look, I lost my typeface on that one. Rather than looking for ideas that had insights, those radical leaps, we said, let's eliminate all the ideas in this data set that lacked insight. Let's not even bother with them. We can identify the ones that don't have an insight for obvious reasons. The thinking was that those that would be left over should possess the greatest potential to contain insights and therefore be big ideas. So that was our methodology going into it. So what we did was when we were working on this, we defined hallmarks for the lack of insight when reviewing potential concepts to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. So our first step was to just eliminate the ones that lacked insight. And so we were defining the parameters for what a lack of insight was. This was the interesting that came up, is that these lack of insight rules really are strategically defined by the criteria. The ones we have here are really just for selling a brick that can't be used as a brick. But I wouldn't necessarily argue that these are intended to be universal. Like if you're trying to find a new app to solve a problem, or you have a challenge for designing a space, or you have a piece of communication. And that's why we're going back with the workshop. What we want to do is get people thinking about how to define this lack of insight criteria. But this is the best we had at this time. So if you've been thinking about ideas to sell a brick, we said our first lack of insight was actually a pretty obvious one, which was off brief. If there was any idea that used a brick as a brick, we just threw it out. Said that wasn't the challenge, that wasn't the brief, they're off brief. And I put some of these examples up there. You can see brick igloo was one that people thought was just brilliant. And like, we're still using it to build a structure. We're still using a brick as a construction component. Dog house, reef construction, building material outside. So even when the challenge was there, the way people ideate is that they're still going to have stuff. So all of these we just threw out immediately. We didn't have to think about whether an archway contained an insight. It was off brief. Lack of insight too vague. We're dealing with people just coming up with ideas. And their challenge was to come up with 50 ideas at a minimum. So a lot of them were just trying to get that number, just trying to hit the number. But if the idea was too vague to be determined, we didn't even bother with it. We probably could have, but we were just trying to process the idea. So some of these came up. An idea to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick military. What's that even mean, right? Barn use, painting design, school, Pennywise brick. That's still one of my favorites. I don't know what that means. It's too vague, so we just tossed it aside. All right, so we've got two lack of insight criteria that we're able to process a lot of ideas going out. Our lack of insight number 3, not viable. And it's funny, these brick sandals came up over and over and over again, and we couldn't figure out why everybody was trying to turn a brick into sandals. Turns out that this was a spoof image that someone made, and so the Google results were kicking back this. So we actually found we had a Google proof assignment, and if we were going to put a lack of insight, we'd probably put a Google flag in there to have just a machine rule to check Google if it exists. But we were like, all right, if these aren't even possible, use of a brick, we're not going to consider them. Ice cubes, right? The thermodynamics of a brick can't be used as a fondue pot, liposuction tool, right? Universal auto master key, cheese grater. They're ideas, but they just can't, a brick would not be functional at it. And now we're going to start getting into some of the more controversial lack of insights, which gets some debates in here. So this fourth one was redundant. And I like this one. If the idea already exists as a better solution, does that count as an insight? Does that count as a radical leap in thinking for an unexpected use for a brick? And we said, no, it doesn't. Sure, bricks can look like speakers and you can turn bricks into speakers potentially, but why not just go with speakers? Why try to, you wouldn't use a brick unless you had this challenge to actually try to use a brick. So we started throwing out all these redundant examples. So nightlight, an umbrella, straight edge, nail file. These are sort of all redundant, inferior versions. And you'd be surprised how many people wanted gym weights to work, right? Yeah, they're heavy. But they all sort of see the brick in its functional form as something heavy. So we started throwing out all these redundant, there's examples, anchor, saw so many anchors come up. And it's just like, just get an anchor. This is the one we're going back to the workshops because this is the one we have debate among the authors, and you guys might debate among this too. But obvious. If the idea is obvious, and if you guys are playing along, I imagine everyone probably said, well, just sell it as a doorstop. Or just sell it as bookends. And we started seeing ideas getting duplicated over and over. And this is something from my background, is that if we started seeing the same idea coming up over and over for any particular challenge, we sort of said, well, that's the obvious, that's the low-hanging fruit. If that's an idea that just about everyone could come up with, that doesn't represent a radical leap. That doesn't represent that unexpected jump. And therefore, it's not a big idea. It's probably a viable idea. It's not vague, it's viable, it meets all the others. But if it's so obvious that anyone can come up with it, is it a big one? And so we just came up with this number, and this is something we want to say. If we saw a potential concept appear 4 or more times we defined it as crossing a threshold into obvious. We're saying, all right, anybody could come up with that. If given this challenge, if anyone could come up with it, you haven't really gone into those destinations of unexpected insights. So these are the object examples, and this is where people have been playing along, they groan because they think that. So doorstop, bookends, these are the top 20, like out of the 7,000, these appeared over and over. Or weapons, window smasher, candle holder, seeing those 3 holes, bug crusher, tire, chalk, step stool, dive toy. Backpack training weight, feels like it sounds like a good one, until you start seeing it over and over and over. Toilet tank water conserver, that already exists, so that's just another Google one. Succulent planter came up over and over. Finally, we tracked this one down to a blog that said, great ideas if you want to repurpose a brick, turn it into a succulent planter. And all those represent not someone coming up with a new idea or generating, they're just sort of repurposing ones. Pet rock, I can't figure out, that's from my youth. And I can't figure out why it's still a thing with, kids 30 years later, but pet rock keeps coming up. But it already exists and it's so obvious. So these are what we processed. And so what we did was we had 22 people judge the ideas to try to get a good sample set. And the judges were given these instructions. So we didn't process the idea first. We told the judges, dismiss any ideas that lack the insight and gave them the same rules that you guys have. And then what they were to do is say, review the leftover ideas and choose their top 15 and see if those are concepts. Well, the thinking here was that if choosing concepts, big ideas were truly subjective, it's just, oh, that's your opinion versus my opinion, then the overlap of the judge's final concepts, 15 out of 7,000, ought to be pretty slim. It should, the subjectiveness should start to kick in. So that's sort of what we were expecting. That was, we said, all right, we're going to find out. Maybe the idea is just, maybe it is just subjective. Maybe we're just throwing numbers and defining things that can't be defined. So here we are at testing and judgment, and I'm moving through this deck quickly, which makes me happy. Here's the big surprise, and this blew my mind. I wasn't expecting the judges to ignore the machine rules and the lack of insight in favor of the personal subjectivity. The worst, the absolute worst were the creative directors, the people who did this for a living. They would find ideas and they'd start to try to make it work. And I was like, don't try to make it work. Use the rules to throw out the ones. Find the one. So what happened was every single judge, and we had professionals, we had some students, we had all different warps. All of them, we had to send back their final selects and say, look, this one violated the lack of insight. This one violated the lack of insight. We'll let these 7 go through, but you got to go find new ones that don't hit our machine rules. This completely surprised me, and it was like pulling teeth, because that's when I started getting argumentative. It's like, I don't care that you think it's a good idea, it doesn't pass our lack of insight. So the authors, we were enforcing the machine rules, and we finally started calling them machine rules, because we were looking at, all right, if we could put this into an algorithm, if we could start to, and you can tell AI came online just as we were putting this together. And we couldn't even get everyone to 15. We said, all right, just get us to 13. What's the least we can get to?
Wow.
And so once we were able to get the judges to follow the rules and identify what they thought were final big ideas, these final concepts, these ideas with insights that radical need, that's when we started to compare the results. So to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick, these following 6 were identified as concepts. I had a whole nother batch in here of the judges, even when the judges gave us their finals, we actually had to reject those finalists for lack of insight. We said, well, this one's redundant and this one's. So I'm just giving you guys the ones that the judges could agree on. And so 6 out of 22, not a great percentage, but DIY denim distressor. Right? We said, all right, this passes all the things. Not your first thought to sell a brick that can't be used as a brick. And you'll notice we had to switch away from AI representations of these visuals of Photoshop. We had to actually get these illustrated. And what's interesting about AI is that we realized it can't generate a novel concept. It can't generate something new because it only scrapes. It can only combine. And so we couldn't actually get an AI representation of a DIY denim distressor because one didn't exist. And because it didn't exist, AI couldn't assemble it. So we actually had to hire an illustrator to put this together. So Urban Outfitter, you put this on the shelf. You don't want to pay $70 or probably $170 for distressed jeans. You get your kit. All right, unexpected use of a brick that can't be sold as a brick. This one is probably, if I had to do it, I could see making money off this, right? Buy a pallet of bricks, bricks are $1 a piece, haul it over there, sell them for $5 a piece. You've sold a brick, and reimagining a brick not as a brick. So a Trump rally accessory, probably not viable in the next few years, but we'll see. At the time, felt like a big idea. This one really stood out. Hiking trail traffic light. Especially like if you think about the Royal Arch thing where there's those narrow gaps. This actually starts to get into product development. All right, we throw a little solar thing on it, some LED lights and some motion tracking, and you sync them. All right, one at the top of the trail, one at the bottom. And so you can regulate going back and forth. Super viable? Well, we could debate on that. But is it an unexpected use of a brick that can't be sold as a brick? Absolutely, I would argue. This is when the judges really started to agree. NBA worst shooter brick trophy, or intramural leagues, or anything else, right? Novelty item in the store. It's a brick that can't be used as a brick, you win the brick trophy. We're getting close. This was one. This is one I'd say is an unexpected. When I first saw this one, it came through as a guide. No one else came up with that. An Egyptian hieroglyph trainer. Is there a market need? Yeah. But does it use a brick in an unexpected way? Absolutely, right? There's a pretty big leap in imagination to see a brick and then to see this. And so this was one of my favorites. Could be kind of, might be actually a fun thing to buy. And then this was the overall consensus. And it's not that surprising, we might say some of the other ones, but these are just what the judges chose. Business card for a construction company. Right? You go, okay. If it can't be used as a brick, but it aligns, it's like, yeah, pile them outside. You want to hire a construction company, take it home. Great. It's funny, the debate is, well, are these the best ideas? Are these the most viable for selling a brick? Those are all good debates. That's why we're going back. We want to talk about these lack of insights. But what I can argue is that all these finalists represent a leap in imagination compared to what you would think of when you're trying to come up with an idea for a brick. But what we noticed is that we call these big ideas. So what we got to was, well, at least the judges agreed. So that was positive. They weren't all over the map. We didn't have completely diverse. They were all honing in on these. So at least the machine rules were coming in. And we processed this. All right, so this gave us, we had those 6 finalists that we could all agree. Those were the big ideas. That gave us about one concept in 1,200. But, which was a better number than Stanford's one in 2000. But actually, when we normalized the results by removing the duplicates, by removing them over and over, we said we actually only had a total of about 2,200 discrete ideas, unique ideas. So those 7,000 was really a lot of duplicates, but only those obvious ones, those vague ones, all those came out. And if we go by discrete, 6 in that gave us our number of 1 in 376. And just to review, so this was the processing of ideas, discover big ideas. We had 158 creative thinkers thinking of at least 50 ideas each. Not all of them got to 50. That gave us the 7,000. We had these 22 judges sort through all 7,000. And so we made them go down the list and quickly eliminate the ones that lacked insight. And then the authors representing, we said, we're just going to represent the rules. We rejected any of the judges' final choices that lacked insight. So to reprise it, in our experience, the answer was on the order of 2001. This is where Stanford defined it. We're back at 1 in 376. And look, I gave us a little shout out to our case building. But this is all a preview. So in February, we're returning to the conference. And what we want to do is create a new challenge. And we want to review those lack of insight parameters. I will probably kick out obvious. I'm not sure if we want to keep obvious in there, but that's what I want the people at the workshop to do. At least, you know, if this were the workshop, I'd say, let's come to agreement. But now we're going to sell a crystal ball. So I think brick is done. I'm personally tired of looking at brick ideas. We just started another function that everyone has a form function of. We all know what a crystal ball is. We know it's used for decor and fortune telling. But now we want to see if people can have ideas to overcome its functional fixedness. Don't know if we'll hit 376. Don't know if those numbers are just specific to the thing. But what we're doing is we're going to define a new lack of insight parameters. And after defining those parameters, what I'm hoping is after we get out of that conference, is that they'll give this challenge to their students or anyone interested, come up with 50 ideas. And so hopefully we'll actually, you know, get a bigger and more international set of data beyond just sort of students from the University of Colorado. And we'll take another swing at defining that idea ratio. And what's interesting, if you guys want to play, you can just go to sellacrystalball.com and enter your 50 ideas, and we'll add it to the data set. And then maybe I'll come back next year and we'll see if we have a further refining of the idea ratio. Look at that. I was worried it was going to take a whole hour, but we got through the bulk of it. Any architects in here? No. Architects, well, architects, I've had architects really sort of get allergic to this. You're trying to define creativity. It's like, yeah, we are. That's the thing. So questions, pushback, thoughts?
Oh, very interesting talk. Thank you.
Oh, good.
So we do the exercise now?
If you guys want to, I mean, I won't be
50
able, I mean, you can
You
just
won't be
go.
able to do the judgment, but we.
Yeah, I won't be
can
able to
go
do a
down.
judgment, but I can tell you, know, if you guys do want to do the Seller crystal ball, get bowling ball out of your system. We already know that that's probably going to be the first one that everyone thinks of. This would be a great bowling ball, right? And it's funny, I think even as you guys were probably, as the brick challenge comes up, anybody who's creative starts to ideate, imagine. And, you know, I just take, you know, I take it that at least it's proof, at least to my students, you know, because when we're, you know, we design posters and advertisements and a creative thing. And the temptation to come up with the first idea that works is overwhelming. It's almost impossible to get students not to fall in love with that. And so this has been the process to say, if you give your time, self-time to think, and it actually, I don't know, has anyone seen John Cleese's presentation on creativity? He gave a talk to the Royal Hall years ago, and he says, being creative, one of the biggest things you can do is get comfortable with the discomfort of not having an answer. And I think that's absolutely right. That's what this exercise does. And our instinct is like, I want to get to an answer, I want to be done, and I want to make it, I want to do my poster, and I want to get my grade, and I want to be. And if you can sort of live in that pondering state, that loose state, that's when sort of the ideas and the unexpected and those novel things sort of jump in and pop and occur to you. So that's where we are. Yes, do you have a question or a comment? Pushback.
Well, neither.
Oh, okay.
Maybe a comment. First a comment, maybe. I think the higher number of 1,001 and 2,000 in the other study, I forgot the name,
Right.
the Stanford guys, is maybe explainable to the context, because if you say it's a product development process, it rang a bell to me that in many product development processes in the pharmaceutical industry, you also have these numbers of 1,000, 2,000 ideas as per one viable product at the end of the day.
Right.
And second, I forgot it.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Right. It's a different process.
And second point, maybe to even further push your ratio to a smaller number, maybe it was also that I was thinking that in between the lines, I interpreted that you assumed or that you pushed the students for at least 50 ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe if you at 20, I could imagine that maybe they thought harder and only the better ideas might go into it,
Right,
which might easier qualify as being a concept, or how you define it as a big idea at the end
Right.
of the day. So maybe just by 50, it's not surprising that they say, in this case now, golf ball, bowling ball, blah, blah,
Right,
blah. And so this might reduce not only your work amount at the end of the day, but also the worthless ideas, and reduce the ratio of
exactly.
X to Y.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. That's why we're sort of going back to this workshop, because, you know, we've got squishy edges on it, and so we want to try that, you know, so, you know, and even on that site that we have, there's 50 slots to put in, but I don't think we have a block on that you could submit after 10 or 20. But yeah, you know, and that's one of the questions. Do we, you know, and what you pointed out is that we didn't include a refinement in here in terms of, right, let's take these 20 ideas, let's work on them, workshop them.
So it was just brainstorming as many and no
Right,
evaluation.
brainstorming as many
Okay.
and trying to find the ones that were unexpected or exceptional.
Okay.
So that was sort of the parameters of the project, but you're absolutely right. But that was why the judges were so problematic, because that
Yeah.
instinct that you had, they wanted, well, wait a minute, I could make Wallet work.
Then trying to make it work.
Right, because
Yeah.
ideas beget ideas.
Yeah.
And that's what happens, and it's that natural instinct. So yeah, we just finally had to say, all right, just.
Yeah, so it's definitely follow that. That's in my opinion, what would be needed is to compare this. Like, let's say you allow for 10, 20, 50 ideas,
Right.
and then see the ratios. But still, this would be like, in my opinion, it's super artificial in the sense that, well, the moment you force someone to give 50, then we don't know, first of all, how many ideas was removed and not even put into.
Right.
And how many ideas were put into just to fit 50. Yeah?
Right,
So both of
That's what I
those
meant, yeah.
will influence the number. And I also wondering, what does number actually mean? Like, does it help us to some extent with developing new ideas? Especially that what you said is so true. Yeah, that at the end, it's not so important how many ideas we've got in the beginning, but how much we develop those ideas and change them.
right.
By time, yeah, so.
Well, I would say the artificiality is the point, because, you know, what I left out of this is sort of, you know, and this is all based, you know, I'm a big believer in the design thinking process. And I would argue that there's a break in the, you know, we need a fifth step in there between ideate and prototype. Because right now it's just ideate and we decide on it. And I would say if there's a concept step in there, if we actually go process those ideas for insight and unexpected, then that's going to probably reduce the breakage in the prototype. But to your point, why this artificial number is to, especially in our world of creating these communication ideas, is we have to stop them, you know, from landing on the first idea that works, or the first two. Hey, this works, let's dig in and keep it working. And what we're trying to do is say, no, we need something that sort of hasn't been seen before. You know, in other versions of the presentation, I'll use an example of an idea is, hey, wouldn't it be great if I could push a button and a taxi would show up, right? We've always, you know, you have those buttons at the airport, you have that. Everyone's had that idea. That's a very common idea. That's an obvious one. The insight that created Uber and Lyft was the realization, what if it's not a taxi, not the button? And so that leap, you know, so that the artificial number is there just to keep them arriving at a solution too soon, but it's also to put them in that state of let's just keep ideating and, you know, keep brainstorming. And you know, in my experience, what I've seen is that when we can get, especially students and even myself, when we're in that state, we sort of that number gets to idea exhaustion, you know, something that comes up. Most people peter out around, if they're about 28.
Okay.
Like if you were to do this, you could probably sit down and come up with 20 ideas or a crystal ball.
Mhm.
If you're really sort of good at this, you might get up to about 35. I've never really seen anybody just get to 50 in one batch. And so when you run out of ideas, that's sort of when, and there are quotes on, that's when your sort of subconscious starts to roll on it, and you start, and that's when you go do something else. You go for a hike, you go, and all of a sudden it sort of hits you, it lands on you. So yes, it's, we're fully aware that defining ideas and defining creativity and defining, this process is almost, it's artificial to a certain extent, but that's sort of why I'm excited by it, because at least we're starting to get to it. Do we make students come up with 376 ideas? No, I still make them come up with.
But I like it very much. I like this idea, and especially for the students to really show them. I once had this on some course or something like that. Someone said like how you can divide a cake.
Right.
Kids, so you have to go the same. Yeah, you know it for sure. So I like it very much. But again, I would give more concrete things like. Just mentioned that this website asks you for ideas, but you sit and write all of them, but then you have to come back,
Right,
and add new, and then come back and then come back with certain, distances. Of course, this makes things very, very complicated. But this will really give us an insight of how much the ideas
Right.
change with time. Yeah,
yeah,
with more thinking about it.
yeah. So if anyone has ideas on how to refine the process, we'd love to do that, because you're raising the same questions we have. Is even the word cell the right idea, right? We decided just to go back to cell and crystal ball, but the cell has got so many debates, especially when the leads folk start to chime in. Well, this is a viable thing, and therefore it's like, all right. We try to pick our sort of, things just to sort of get to a number. But yeah, you're right. It's open to all those, right? This is sort of the closest we've come, and we've come further than the last time I was here. The thing, at some point we just sort of broke it down, obvious and unexpected. What was interesting about the final ideas is that we do know that those are all novel. Though there were no duplicates on any of those. So the brick shooter was just one. The drainage destructor was just 1 out of 7,000. But that also raises the question, does that mean that even though they're duplicated, does that mean they're not good ideas?
Yeah, with this duplication, I've got some doubts.
Yeah.
That maybe some good ideas are thrown just because they are duplicated. But of course,
Yeah,
in the real world, the ideas that are duplicated are probably not worth so much as
exactly, right. And so that's why the parameters, it's we're finding some totems in the fog, but we don't have the complete answers. Yes.
So the judges, were they looking at the whole data set of like 7,000? Oh.
And it was painful.
Oh.
Yeah.
When you weren't the judge, the judges.
Yeah, it was painful for the judges, right? Because they had that same thing. They just wanted to get to an answer. I like this one. Can I be done with this? It was a process, but that's more ideas than most people have ever looked at for a single thing. Yes, I'm sorry, Alan.
Okay, I want to share an experience. So at college, we have like photo contests, right? So everybody can submit for portrait or for still or for landscaping or environment. And then they have a room where the judge is inside and we can see outside and we see pile of photos.
Right.
And they were just like, so quickly, within an hour or two, we went through, I have probably 10,000 photographs, of course, then different categories. So this is all the people, I don't think, and we watched it. They were just like, we said, wow, we spent so much time to craft the thing and they only take a few seconds.
Right now.
It's no, maybe, it's no, maybe. And then eventually it emerges like everybody agree what's on the table or 10 and it starts selecting and prioritize. So it feels really cool because we get to watch them and we're like, wait, that was mine or whatever.
Why
We don't get to say anything. So that was interesting. But that photo contest also have so this is a long time ago when I was in college. So we have physical camera, all right? We have the film. And so they were giving out, there will be different category, but then there will be also the most entry price that they will give you like 25 films or 50 films. Okay. So most people they would did stop before 25.
right,
I went beyond.
right,
So I got
the most,
the most contribution one, but I also got the best photo for the portrait, which
Right.
happened to be a self portrait. And the other one, when they find out that it was the same author, supposedly I was supposed to get the second prize for the environment. They said, this is the same author. No, I put down to like honorable mention. But for me, the interesting thing is that when I saw 25 film and I just went go over 30 because they decided that's my tuition. I just
Right.
like crazy. And then within that, I have a couple really good ones.
right,
So when I share with my friends who are in the photo club, she said, I think you're gonna win something, like that is good, that is good. So even before I submit, but then you have to develop, you have to pay the money. So
right,
people will go for the amount of submission to the 25 film, and I actually developed out of, I don't know how many.
yeah,
But I actually got a bigger award because with the 25 film or 30 films, like 30, like 1,000 photographs I've taken, they were maybe 3 the best one or something, just like that.
right. Well, and I think that, you know, what it is that there's a lot of anecdotal things that feel, it's like, what I'm noticing is that especially my students, they have that same sort of phenomenon, once they
Yeah.
sort of go beyond. And finally, we just sort of, I just sort of say, just think of it as like hacking your brain. Once you get all those obvious ideas out.
Yeah.
You're gonna experience this phenomenon. I don't know quite where that came from, but I think that's a better idea. How did I think of that idea? And so, yeah, it's. We don't have it figured out, but it feels like, at least we're starting to get some consensus, like, oh yeah, that, you know, everyone's sort of
Well,
experienced.
the other thing I was thinking about is that you say sell a brick or
Mhm.
sell the crystal ball, maybe. So many different competition become a popularity test, right? People trying to bring all their friends coming to vote for me.
Right,
Right? But what if anybody who need to vote, they need to pay $1 or something and before.
oh, I see what you're
vote,
saying,
Right, and then in the end, it's like, okay, where are you putting your vote? Because then out of all
Right.
the ideas, then you can only put your vote for
Right.
something unless you really want to invest in buying more ticket to vote.
right,
So instead of people arguing like what will sell, what will not sell.
Right,
Somehow
right,
we get the
right.
participant with a
Okay.
way to vote with money. Even though money could be
That's
just
good.
only $1.
Right, that's a great point. That might be part of what we come out of the workshop with, right? I'd love to have sort of those parameters that we all agree on. I mean, it's, you know, when you were talking about the photo contest, it reminds, I mean, we can look at this experience here. If anyone is ever challenged to come up with a T-shirt, it doesn't matter the club. Can anyone please, you know, we're always gonna see the Flatirons, right? We're always gonna see a Buffalo for, you know, and trying to get people beyond that first solution that feels like the thing is sort of the challenge. But I like that idea of that could be an interesting, yeah. The team members were saddled with cell. I was like, should we just reimagine a crystal ball? They're like, no, we had celebrate. We need to create our continuity. So take the wins where we can. Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me back. I have to run. I have a class at 12:30. So I
Okay.
have to run. Appreciate you all coming. Great feedbacks. If you have any thoughts, you guys know where to reach me, email me.
So